456.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping issues. Did everyone print the information that was sent to them by email? We do have a few copies, and going forward, we will have a few copies. See, Carl brought his, so he's all set to go. He doesn't even have to print it. We will have a couple copies at each of the meetings, just in case you misplaced or you don't have, but very frankly, we would like not to have to go through printing all that. So if you have the availability at your office and you can print it at your home, it would be greatly appreciated. Do we have the handout with the codes on? Yes. Thank you. When I was reviewing the material, one of the things that struck me, despite the fact that I'm on the planning board, is I certainly don't know all the codes that are in town. And I doubt that anybody really knows all of them. So I asked the department if they would prepare a glossary of terms for everyone, so that when you're reading these reports, would you take one and pass it around? When you're reading these reports, you would have a frame of reference for the information that's in the reports. It's not working. It should be on. It says it's on. It says it's got a low battery. So this hopefully will help you a little bit to be able to understand some of the reports as they come through, because as we get deeper into this, I'm sure that Code Studios will be providing more and more, that's better, thanks Dan, more and more information that will be somewhat abbreviated, and would be good to have this on hand. The draft reports that we're looking at tonight were reviewed by the technical committee. They made some suggestions to Code Studios, and Code Studios did revise the reports. After tonight's meeting, based on the input that we have, there will be further revisions. Once those revisions are made, all this information will be posted on the website for the public to view. The committee would like to encourage the public to review the documents on the website and comment in writing, if you would, to the planning department, so that we can address any issues that you feel are relevant to this topic. It would be good to have it in writing so that we make sure that we understand exactly what your questions are, and we can do a thorough examination of them and report back to you. Comments from tonight, as I said, will be given to Code Studio so that they can incorporate them into the report that's going to go on the website. And I guess really that's it. We're going to review them now. Dan's going to go over them with them. Dan?
Okay. Assuming folks can hear me, I'm going to talk loud. The microphone is really for the recording equipment that we have. So, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Okay, as Dal mentioned, we're here tonight to review a couple of the initial documents that Code Studio has prepared as we kick the project off. If you recall the discussion last month, the first couple of months are going to be spent evaluating our current situation, evaluating the current comprehensive plan. Next month we'll look at the zoning code. They'll be doing an analysis on that. You'll be receiving a report of their analysis on the zoning code, and then they'll be doing an analysis of the existing commercial centers. Again, the focus of this project is to update the comprehensive plan and the zoning code, primarily in our commercial centers and our mixed-use centers. So that third product will be an analysis of the geography and many of the physical characteristics of the existing commercial centers and those areas that were designated for mixed use in the comprehensive plan. Those three reports will be reviewed over the next couple of months. In August, we hope to provide their sense of direction to the town board in terms of what this analysis has told them. They'll make some recommendations for the way forward. We'll look for the town board to provide some approval of that direction, and then in September we'll kick off a fairly intensive week of activity related to a couple of the centers in town in a charrette-like activity, which will be a very intensive time frame where we'll get into the details of those areas in terms of zoning, land use, transportation, many of the other characteristics, some of the demographics around those areas, and we'll really start to focus on the physical characteristics to start to try and address some of the shortcomings that we find in the plan and you read about this week, and then also in the code next month. So that's kind of the way forward over the next couple of months. The first task was to look at the comprehensive plan. They also provided their draft of the public outreach plan, and Annette will talk a little bit about that later. I'll provide a little information, and Annette will talk about some of the things that she's finding up to this point. And then we'll go through a little summary of what's next and what the next steps are. So that first task is to look at the comprehensive plan and analyze that plan with a specific emphasis on this hierarchy of commercial centers. As you read, there are several typologies used in the comprehensive plan to describe our commercial centers. We'll talk a little bit about those. And it's a little confusing and certainly doesn't give the community, the planners, the development community a clear sense of what was intended for those areas. And then Lee took a look at just how that comp plan language and the typologies and the things we'll talk about, how that matched up with the existing zoning districts and some of the characteristics of our zoning code. That was in the tail end, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, next slide, please. The first part of the memo talks about the current setting, the situation out there. Again, our intent is to update the comprehensive plan to reflect current and contemporary standards and practices and bring our zoning code along. Recalling that zoning is the primary implementation tool that we have for the comprehensive plan, at least from a land use perspective. So Lee talked a little bit about what's going on out there and how it influences what we do here. He noted things like there's a trend nationally and locally now for folks to begin to prefer shopping in places like Buffalo, Elmwood Village, some of the villages in the region, Lewiston, Kenmore, Williamsville, East Aurora. People seem to enjoy that environment. That's a trend that has been going on nationally for a while. It's certainly striking home locally. If you read the paper, you can see the amount of redevelopment in the city and many of the older buildings for living accommodations to be close to that urban environment, to be close to walkable places, to take advantage of the mixed-use environment and some of the efficiencies that brings in not having to get in your automobile and drive to those places. He noted that there's a large number and a variety of centers in our town now, but that national trends seem to be indicating that the effects of the internet and some consolidation of retail uses throughout the region and nationally may begin to erode some of the demand for space in centers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's also this desire for third space, that place where you can go and work, relax, or play, if you will, aside from the house and the workplace. And one thing that we're going to have to keep in mind as we go forward is that there is an initiative locally to begin to look at how we can utilize transit in parts of Amherst to improve transportation and access, primarily in the southwest corner between the South Campus and the university itself up in the north. And lastly, he talked a little bit about the trends both in retailing, but some of the demographic and health trends that we're probably familiar with. Folks are looking for a healthier lifestyle. They want to walk places. They don't want to drive their car everywhere. So the younger folks certainly have that objective in mind. That's one of the things that they took away from the stakeholder interview they had with some of the younger folks that they talked to. And some of us older folks have the same desire, to improve our health and enjoy a lifestyle that's more in keeping with healthy practices. Next slide. Some of the key insights that Lee provided in terms of our comprehensive plan relate to the ability of the plan to communicate the town's desire and vision for these centers, and primarily the mixed-use concept that was fairly heavily used in the last comprehensive plan. I'm going to talk about some of this stuff in detail in a moment, but you probably noticed his comment related to Figure 6, which is the land use plan. And actually, Annette, why don't you go to the next slide? This will be a little easier to explain, I think. So this is just a section of Figure 6 from the comprehensive plan and generalized land use plan, and I'll point out one of the examples, or a couple of examples that he notes in his analysis. But one thing I'd like to point out here, this is a southwest section. These pink areas are designated for mixed use in the comprehensive plan. These stars, or the black asterisk that he describes in his analysis, refer to what we call mixed-use activity centers. And many of those, in fact, I think all of them, were described in a little more detail in the comprehensive plan. But as he pointed out, perhaps not to the level of detail necessary to provide the guidance that everyone might be looking for. These red areas are general commercial areas, retail commercial. The yellow areas, here we go. The yellow areas are residential. Blue are public and semi-public community type facilities, and the green areas are recreation and open space areas. So just as an example, in this portion of the town, we have several places that are mixed-use activity centers, and that you'll notice that they're generally located in some of the more traditional commercial areas of the town. The University Plaza area here, Eggertsville, Snyder, Kensington, Worley, and Harlem, certainly the Village, and then the areas just to the outside of the Village where the town has jurisdiction, the Village does not. Or the Village does, the town does not, really. So we call out those areas in the plan. We talk about what we might want to see in these areas. This, for example, is a discussion. I checked this battery, too. I knew this was going to happen. Start at the far right. This is a description of the types of commercial centers in the comprehensive plan. They range from traditional, neighborhood, community, and regional. They imply a certain scale. They also imply a certain footprint. When I say scale, I mean height and draw in terms of their retail capacity or capability. And they also have a general square footage for a footprint. Sometimes it refers to the anchor for that center, but for the most part, it relates to the size of the center itself. And that ranges from 10,000 square feet of traditional size up to 75,000 or more for a regional center. Now, if you're looking at this typology, you could probably say Niagara Falls Boulevard area, Transit Road, those are our regional centers. Our community centers, which generally range in the area, can be up to 150,000 square feet, generally less than 75,000. Those might be areas like the Walker Center down the street, the Clearfield Plaza. Those are our community centers. Neighborhood centers are the smallest scale center that don't have this traditional theme about them. And these would be your smallish areas, your small convenience stores, maybe something like the area up at North French and Dodge and up in that area, a small store, maybe the North French and Campbell Boulevard, where you might have a pizza on one side and a small retail establishment on the other side. And the traditional centers are those areas that we think of as, the old centers, community places, so to speak, in town, like Eggersville and Snyder. They have a traditional form and character about them, and they typically have buildings of 10,000 square feet or less. So those are the types of centers. Comprehensive plan describes those, and it talks a little bit about where they might be located, but that's the extent to which it addresses the size and scale of center in the plan. Another typology in the plan is this types of mixed-use centers. And we have 4 of those: university-related, special use, highway intersection centers, and urban village centers. Now remember, the red part are the general commercial areas. Those relate to the typology on the right, the commercial centers. The black stars relate to the mixed-use centers. And so if I had the entire map up there, you'd see where, you wouldn't see where, you'd see a series of dots around that would denote the location of those centers, but you wouldn't necessarily know which center is which type. And that's one of the fundamental problems that Lee pointed out. So the map treats the centers the same. They got a black asterisk on the map on a pink underlying color. But in fact, if you read into the plan, you'll see that places like Eggersville and Snyder might be urban and village centers. A place like Clearfield Plaza might be more of a highway intersection center. Special use centers relate to special uses like the hospital and the medical area around Maple and Youngs Road. And then the university-related center obviously is unique in the sense that it relates specifically to the university and some areas around that. But again, it's difficult to discern that from the map. You can get it in a read, but the next problem he talks about is that the future character of those centers is not described very well. I brought up the one photograph that I could find from the plan that relates to an urban village center. This happens to be Harlem and Maine, Snyder Square, where this was put in as an example of what that might look like. But clearly there's very little description of what that is in the plan, certainly no discussion of architectural standards or anything that would lead one to understand what that should be, or what the vision for that place should be, or is, in fact. So, and little or no description of urban form for new development. So, while the plan in the middle here has a description of development considerations, those are not described in any great detail, and they're not ascribed to a specific area. So we got a little challenge here in terms of what do we mean by center, commercial center, what do we mean by mixed-use center. We do have some description in here, but I think his take on it, and I think if you talk to Gary and Ellen and some of the folks that work with the current planning side of things and the development side of things, you'd find that the folks that are asked to implement this come with questions. And there is some interpretation, and there's supposed to be some interpretation and flexibility to this, especially in a comprehensive plan. But what he's suggesting is there's probably some improvements that could be made. There are improvements that could be made to make this a little clearer. And of course, there are certain areas in the town where we have probably very specific expectations as to what that development would look like, because we're interested in preserving the context of the area around it. So that's kind of a summary of the issues that he found with the comprehensive plan. A couple other things that I mentioned. Can you back up on that? Okay. Not a lot of discussion of sustainable approaches to development. And the mixed-use concept, the center concept, it can be strongly related to sustainable land use practices and things like smart growth. There's not a lot of discussion of that in the plan itself. Certainly there's no discussion of sustainable practices in terms of infrastructure. How can we deal with our stormwater? How can we deal with with parking and paving and some of those other things. Not much discussion of that at all in the plan. Our zoning districts are use-based, and that means they speak specifically to the use that's allowed, but as I mentioned, not a lot in terms of character and architectural characteristics. Now, that has served the town for many, many years, but what we see and what we hear from folks is when they come to planning board meetings, there are questions about character, there are questions about architectural design, things like that. In certain parts of the town, specifically the ones that I think we talked about earlier, that have some contextual importance, not that they all don't, but there are some that probably have a greater level, deserve a greater level of sensitivity. There's not much information there. And it primarily relates just to use, auto-oriented kinds of discussions. The good news is that he feels pretty strongly that there's a basis there, but there are improvements that need to be made. And you can go to the next slide, next one after that. He provides a comparison of our comp plan with what he considers national best practices and certain elements that we should be looking for in our plan. And he goes down the list of concepts and ranks those according to what he sees as being information that achieves an objective in describing the different concepts, partially achieves the objective, or does not address it at all. And you can see on the far right-hand corner, there's lots of opportunity, according to him, to improve the description and discussion and the detail for many of these concepts and the details that relate to them. So, for example, in land use, again, he mentioned that it's a land use-oriented plan, but because of that, it makes the idea and the separation of use that brings with it, makes the idea of mixed-use development difficult to pull off. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of form in a minute. And certainly in the plan and in the corresponding discussion in the zoning code, there's not an ability to make a clear distinction about the intended intensities of uses, even if it's uses and or associated kinds of things. In terms of development character, I've talked a little bit about that already. There's some discussion of the existing character. He doesn't feel it's adequate. Not a lot of discussion about vision for those centers in those areas. The descriptions that are there are generally, this is what's there, this is how you would preserve it, or this is how we think you should preserve it. Not a lot of talk about what it should be or how it should evolve in the future. And I think, I'm sorry, somebody have a question? Okay. So not a lot of talk about how these things should look and at what function they should play in the overall town commercial base that we have. Again, from a couple of the stakeholder interviews, the results that we've gotten so far is that people are maybe looking for that kind of vision, the intent for those areas to be a little clearer, again, to try and be more contextually sensitive. As far as development character goes, overall, the link to the center types is not necessarily good, and there's very little description of that. The existing character is described, but there's not too much discussion of the future. Infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion about these forms of infrastructure that would support centers, but they're not specific to the centers themselves. They're treated generally in separate chapters in the plan, but they don't address those opportunities that might exist for integrating green space in a more urban environment. A lot of times we think about green space, we think about the parks, we think about the large areas that we have, Nature View Park and whatnot, but there's not a lot of consideration given to green space in the more urbanized areas. And I would tell you that there's a perfect example of that right out the door here between the library and Village Hall. where the village took a driveway and turned it into a public green meeting space. And that's the kind of thing that we don't talk a lot about in our plan, certainly, but it's the kind of opportunity that might exist to improve those kinds of things in those environments.
And people ask about transportation.
Mm-hmm.
According to the analysis, 2015 plan addresses transportation well, but what about transit?
Right, well, I think that's one of the things that he pointed out, is that transit is not discussed. It's discussed in the plan, and it is. And at the time the plan was updated, 12, 14 years ago now, the town's position on transit was that, you know, the buses that the NFTA provided was the essence of the public transit service that was here. It certainly could be improved upon. We could maybe work our site plans a little bit to accommodate transit better than we had in the past, but there wasn't any talk about any significant enhancement to transit or forms of transit. So
just because something is the good grade in the right column here doesn't mean we're not going to look at it.
yeah, and I think that this one, those all partially meet the objective. So there's certainly room there to improve that. And one of the comments we heard from the technical committee was, you guys, us, the town, we're in the midst of a discussion about transit enhancement in Amherst. And what a wonderful opportunity to start to think about ways that could be integrated into the comprehensive plan for the future. So, okay. Any other questions on this?
Dan, before you go forward, I guess one of the questions I have is not to you, but to the committee as a whole. This report is pretty detailed, but a lot of it in there is suppositions at this point of what we want to do going forward. It's addressing where we think shortcomings are. Is there anything else that you guys would like to see or comments that you like the committee would like to make on this? How helpful was this? Was it thorough enough? Was it too thorough? I think we need to give Coast Studios a little bit of direction from our standpoint as to how we feel about the report. Any comments, anybody?
Okay, so here's where I got it.
So, again, question is, okay, was the report thorough enough? Did it raise any questions? Do you have any comments on it? Ramona?
More detail, the better. So I can understand what you're doing here
The report, you know, when I read it, it pointed out things that I guess I already knew in the back of my mind, but I never really brought forward. And I guess to the people in the room, because you all have a stake in this, okay, that's why you have to be on the committee. Is there anything that jumped out at you that you wanted to be, you wanted more detail, more explanation on? Was there anything particularly that you noticed as being glaring, something that needed additional attention?
Dale, when I
Okay.
Dale, when I read this over the weekend, I didn't see anything that was overly alarming with the fact that I knew this was strictly limited to the community centers. I mean, right now, this is a limited scope, just looking at community centers. I'm more interested in the latter part of the scope when we look at the entire zoning law, where I see a lot of deficiencies in my view. From what I see so far, I'm not overly concerned about what's been presented because it's focusing on the community centers.
Anybody else?
There's, as we do along, further along in this, the depth, parcel depth, there's an error in it. It's,
What page?
it's on page 9.
Okay. What is it?
Okay, it's underneath where listing notice an example of the parcel depth can be found on Sherwood Drive between Augusta and Sweet Home Road. Well, when going the north side of that, there's a light there everything on the north side is now Fire Store and Walmart. And Hartford Road does not extend to that. Hartford Road stops at Sweet.
I'm not sure, so here's the map of the area I think you're talking about, right? Just happen to have it, and we're gonna talk about it in a moment. So,
You're off mic. He's off mic. That's your question.
everybody's offline, all right. Wonderful. Okay, so this is Sheridan Drive, this is Sweet Home, and this is Bailey. Frank, you were talking about, I mean, this,
The corner of Augusta and Sheridan.
yep, right here. That's it, right there where the, right here.
The entrance to Walmart.
Yep.
Right. And the report says that everything on the north side, along Sheridan between Augusta and Sweet Home, the north side, several processes have been extended back to replace the houses along Hartford. Hartford doesn't go that far. Hartford stops at Sweet Home.
Yeah, I think he's kind of using that as a general east-west kind of line. We can clarify that, though. Yep.
All right, good.
Do you need to recap what you said for the chief? I don't know.
All right. Here's one. I have a question. Here, it's not public, this is just for the comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why you get to the public eventually.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Any other comments from anybody else?
Yeah, I was wondering whether everybody was familiar with the transit study which is going on in Amherst. May help to, you start over again.
Yes,
I
please.
just was wondering if everybody on the committee understands what's going on in terms of the transit, it will be called the GAA study. They're really familiar with what's going on in terms of that in the town right now.
No results, no.
Dan, would you kind of give the Reader's Digest version of what's going on?
Which one?
Just as part of that, I received from an MTA, I had a phone call with a NFPA called me with a survey about extending the light rail and had going up, it was either Niagara Falls Boulevard or Millersburg. And they had a whole group of questions with that. I don't know if that's part of what you're talking about or separate.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that survey, so I haven't seen it. But if it came from the NFTA, that goes a little way to describing what's going on. So, just to be brief, if that's possible for me, there's an ongoing study that's being conducted by the NFTA with consulting support. It's a study that's supported by the Federal Transit Administration, and its intent is to look at ways to enhance transit service along the Buffalo UB corridor. Buffalo meaning downtown Buffalo out to the University North Campus. The study's been ongoing for about two and a half years now. We had expected to receive some recommendations on that study, which would provide some guidance in terms of an alignment for future transit enhancement and perhaps a mode for transit. So the alignments that were under consideration, Duncan mentioned a couple a moment ago, these would extend north from the South Campus at Main Street near University Plaza. One would go along North Bailey, or Bailey Avenue rather, to Grover Cleveland Highway, which becomes Millersport Highway as it crosses Eggert Road and Six Corners. That one would go up along Millersport Highway to the university area, cross into the university campus, traverse the campus in some form or fashion, and then possibly extend up into the Audubon New Community along John James Audubon Parkway. The second alignment would have the transit, and again, I want to be clear about this. These are alignments, they're not modes. So I'm going to talk about modes in a minute. These are alignments. So this alignment would go up North Bailey, or Bailey Avenue, up to about Eggert Road, split off to the west, and go over to Niagara Falls Boulevard, and then up Niagara Falls Boulevard to an area around Maple Road, where it would then go to the east to connect up to the university and then up to the north campus of UB. The third option is to possibly bring it up Niagara Falls Boulevard from the South Campus station in some form or fashion. And right now, that's not clear how that would work, and that depends on the mode that's chosen. So if it's light rail, for example, it's going to be, and I'm not going to get into the underground surface components of the alternatives, but if it's light rail, that may very well have to be constrained to a Millersport Grover Cleveland alignment and a North Bailey alignment, unless there's significant work done at the South Campus station, which would allow it to come up Niagara Falls Boulevard and traverse Niagara Falls Boulevard through the town up to the point where it reaches over or goes over to the east in the Maple Road area. The other, again, is Bailey Avenue and cuts up to Eggert Road, where it heads off to the west to Niagara Falls Boulevard. The modes of transit that are under consideration, I'm not sure I'm going to get them all right, but there's light rail or similar to trains that are there now. They could be below the surface or at grade and or a combination of both. Probably would have to be certainly to get it out of the ground. It has to be underground for some distance. There's a mode that they talk about, which is bus rapid transit, which is a much more enhanced bus vehicle that can generally operate in its own right of way. Could be along the side of the road, could be down the middle of the road, but it could have a station area dedicated to it in either one of those locations, and that probably would include some kind of favorable traffic signal actuation, which would allow the buses to pass through intersections, not have to wait, those kinds of things. The third option is enhanced transit, which essentially could be enhanced vehicles to some extent, but primarily involves operational characteristics like the signal actuation and some other changes that can be made to the traffic system that would allow greater preference for transit use along those corridors. So those are the modes, those are the alternatives. The NFTA is still studying this. They have not released the results of the alternatives analysis, and right now we think what we're told is that those results would be out at the earliest this fall, but it's unclear whether that's going to be the case or not. So, any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? Yep, Carl?
I don't know what the timing is for the potential implementation of this type of project, but is the presumption that if this does go ahead and, let's say, for example, light rail is installed, will the town at that point reassess its zoning along that new transportation corridor to allow for, say, transit-oriented mixed-use development?
It's a good question. So, and I was going to, the next point on this is just that. So, with those kinds of transit enhancements comes the opportunity and probably the obligation to rethink land use planning and zoning along those corridors. And the NFTA was fortunate enough to get a grant through the FTA, again, to conduct what's called a transit-oriented development study, which is actually supposed to begin in the next month or two, and begin to look at those very issues along that corridor from downtown Buffalo up into Amherst. I think I can safely say that they had hoped to have a locally preferred alternative before they started that study, but they don't, and so it's likely that study will look at each of those alignments and modes in the context of transit-oriented development. The idea here being that along transit lines where the investment has been made, zoning and planning should reflect the kinds of uses that should account for the availability, the ready availability of transit, and that generally can translate into higher densities, more walkable areas, less parking, for example, things like that, where folks can take advantage of the transportation service and also take advantage of the efficiencies that come with access to that in terms of the land use that might result in those areas. So, Dan?
Dan, just out of curiosity, the chosen routes or alternatives, how many of our activity centers are on any of the potential alternatives?
In terms of a number, I don't know. Well, I don't know.
Any on the alternatives?
Certainly. So, I'm going to wind back to that map. So, when we talk about centers, specifically, what are you talking about? Are you talking about commercial centers, mixed-use centers?
I'm talking about the mixed-use activity centers that essentially black asterisks.
Okay, off the top of my head now. So, again, this thing's probably going to flame out on me here. But here's the station area here. Okay, we talked about Bailey Avenue, we talked about Grover Cleveland, and we talked about Niagara Falls Boulevard. So you can see here that, this area around University Plaza is one of the mixed-use activity centers. This is just mixed use. It's not called out as an activity center. Again, that's part of the problem, right? If you go further north, this is recollection on my part, I think the next mixed-use activity center you'll find is at the university area, the university itself. And I'm going to step back a minute. I'm surprised Carl didn't. I think Carl might beat me up here a minute. Each of these alternatives. Thanks, Duncan. Each of these alternatives could presumably go up into the Cross Point Business Park. Okay, we're not sure whether, because we're getting mixed signals from the NFTA as to how far they want to carry the study. Initially, they talked a lot about going to Cross Point. Subsequently, they've kind of fallen back away from that a little bit. It's hard to know because we don't get a lot of specific information about it. But so thanks to Duncan here. There's a mixed-use activity center. I don't know if you can see it or not. I'll hold it up here. This is the northern part here. This is the university. This blue area here. There's a mixed-use activity center that was conceived here on the vacant property on the east side of Millersport Highway. This is the Audubon New Community with the center. This is the Muir Woods area up in here, and this is Dodge and Campbell in here. So it would hit these. There aren't. Just drop down a little bit here. Again, the only mixed-use activity centers here are University Plaza, and that's pretty much it in this part of the town. Yep. Thanks.
And what is the definition between a mixed-use activity center and mixed-use?
The mixed-use activity center was intended to either try and capture the character and the scale that might exist in a place like Eggertsville and Harlem, Snyder, Maine, mixed use that exists there now, and it does to some extent. So it was really there to try and encourage the preservation of that form of development in that area. Okay, now if you go out to the university area where there's raw land and that could be developed from scratch, the idea there is to promote the tenets of mixed use, however inadequately it might be described in the plan, but to encourage mixed use form of development, which would generally mean something like you see at Sweet Home Road near Wrench Road, where that new development University Place there is there, where you have a hotel adjacent to higher density student housing, you have retail uses on the ground floor, and you have some availability of residential and offices on the upper floors there. So that's an example of a mixed-use, greenfield kind of mixed-use development. So that's pretty much the difference between the two. Does that help?
It does, I guess
In the definition of mixed use, could that include horizontal mixed use, where you may have a 3-story apartment building next to an office within pretty close proximity? Is that considered mixed use?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
That
You want to
clarifies it.
Pass the microphone to Dan, please.
My belief is that the mixed-use activity centers are really, they're going to be an alternative to going downtown. They're going to be a concentration and almost a destination place within our township so that we can have the same sense of density, proximity to services, all within a compact geography, rather than going downtown to benefit from it. And I think that's at least my thought of what a mixed-use activity center is compared to something that's just mixed use. It's really a destination place within our own town. Is that not accurate?
Sure, that's accurate, and in fact, in some of the stakeholder interviews that we've conducted, particularly with the younger folks, that's the kind of thing they're looking for. I think that's why the Village of Williamsville is probably as successful as it is, right? I mean, that's a pretty good example of a mixed-use activity center in the middle of town that serves that function. It's very popular, and I think that's the kind of thing that when we talked to a couple folks that live in the Eggertsville area, they were excited about the idea of being able to have some of those walkable, mixed-use, vertically mixed kinds of uses in a location nearby that they could walk to and take advantage of primarily without getting in the car and driving.
Does that mean we're...
I agree with Dan's definition, but we have 4 types of mixed-use centers. If we follow that one definition, what happens to the special use centers and the highway intersection centers?
So that's a question.
I guess I agree with what Dan said, and it seems to fit university-related center and urban village center as a destination equal to the village, if not downtown. But what about the special use centers and the highway intersection centers? They don't seem to have the same broad definition that Dan was talking about.
I think they might get blown up.
Well,
That's what I'm reading out of Lee's suggestion, that it might be just one activity type of center, or maybe 2.
matches the urban...
Go ahead, Jim. I think, so we're speculating here, right? And we're also speculating on somebody else's property. But that's what we do. There's a lot of talk about the mixed-use concept here. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that this study is intended to look at the commercial centers, not just the mixed-use centers, but the commercial centers, because they have opportunities to transform and/or be accentuated through planning and zoning as well, and that's certainly something that we intend to do in this study. So it's not, and I don't think they're going to get lost. I think it's just that, I think a couple of takeaways from his analysis is that in any case, and I think you're bringing this up in the discussion you're having now, you can see how difficult it is to get a handle on just exactly what this stuff is, where it should be, how it should look, how it should be connected, how it should be served. And I think one of the objectives of this study is to try and clarify that. And certainly that's your charge. You have the answer to that question, or you will.
Hopefully it becomes clearer as we go along.
Yeah. So, good discussion. What else? Anything else? Okay. So, moving on. One of the other, one thing that Lee did after that discussion of the mixed-use centers and some of the challenges with the comprehensive plan was to look to describe what he would call a framework for place types. And these are factors that he would suggest that we consider when we think about these centers in the future. Maybe something to be a little more definitive about what we mean by mixed-use center or commercial center. So he identifies things like economic draw, urban form and walkability, building height, parcel depth, and use. Maybe those are things that we should try and describe for all of those centers to try and be more specific about what we mean, or provide clearer guidance for the development community and for our own residents who look to the plan as kind of a compact or a contract of what they feel the future ought to bring for those areas. Next slide. And one of the areas that you talked a lot about is how the parcel has a significant role in determining just how much flexibility you might have. I think there tends to be an affinity for mixed-use character areas, Eggertsville, Snyder, Elmwood Village, those kinds of things. Those can't happen everywhere. They won't happen everywhere for a variety of reasons. One example that he provided in his analysis was simply the size of the parcel and the depth of the parcel, and how that would constrain the ability to develop, let's say, a two-story or three-story mixed-use building. It can't be done, for example, on these parcels along Shared Drive across from Walmart, because their depth is too shallow to permit the kinds of parking area and buffer areas that are necessary. And he goes on to point out that just this area that you see kind of enclosed in red here, from Walmart all the way over here to the other side, this area is all zoned general business. The same zoning classification, has the same yard and bulk requirements, has the same use list. However, what he's suggesting is that they're not the same, right? We can't do over here what we can do over here. But we're doing it, we're saying it's the same thing in terms of our zoning code. And so that's I think that's one of the arguments here, is to try and get a little more specific, a little better definition of what can be done with some of these parcels. Go back to those characteristics I talked about a moment ago, that framework, and look at those kind of characteristics and determine what the appropriate type of zoning might be for those areas, given, in this case, their physical limitations. There are certainly other considerations, but and this is a pretty good example of what are we going to do with this? This is a shallow parcel that abuts a single-family residential area. Yet the zoning is the same as it is over here, where we have Walmart. And I think Gary can probably talk better about this than I can. But when a development proposal comes in, there generally is one district that's used to develop commercial property in the town, and it's general business. And it doesn't matter where it is. It could be on a 150-foot parcel depth, or 900 feet, which is what this one is. So that's the challenge we have. We're in our comprehensive plan. And now, can you back up a few more back to the map? Keep going. Sorry. Okay. That's this area up here, right? This red area right here. It's all the same thing, right? We're calling it the same thing. We're saying it's retail commercial. So, again, this idea that we need a little more specificity to the plan, and therefore the code, which is where we're headed after the planning piece, kind of comes out pretty clearly here. Let's go down. So speaking of the existing zoning, one more please. This was an analysis that he did on the existing zoning. He looked at, again, some characteristics, national kinds of characteristics, the intent of the district, the hierarchy of districts. Remember, we talked about the typology. There's a hierarchy implied there between the traditional and neighborhood scale up to the regional scale, a link to the center type. We know that that doesn't really exist in any strong way. And then we talked a moment ago about the options for mixed use and some of the constraints that are there. In our case, our code does, we've made some improvements over the years to the code to try and get the mixed use concept built into the code. We have districts like the traditional neighborhood development district, the traditional, what's the TDD? Traditional neighborhood district, the
Traditional.
and the TDD, the big one.
TNB
and TND, right. Two districts that are really intended to promote mixed-use kinds of development, but again, we tend to see a deferral to the general business district as the way that most development wants to go. And again, this is just another example here on this side of the table. You know, here's the different places, and here's the type of center they are, and then you can see the variety of zoning districts that can be used to implement that in the different places. So not necessarily as clear a distinction as perhaps we can achieve and maybe ought to pursue in this project. Okay, so I don't know if that does justice to the main highlights of the comp plan analysis. I suppose we can stop here for a minute and talk a little bit more if anybody else had any comments from your read of the analysis, something that maybe we haven't talked about yet, or something that we want to think a little bit more about.
Anybody with more comments? Let me ask you a question. From the feedback that you got so far, is there enough material for you to go back to Code Studio at this point and make any adjustments to the report?
That's why we like to worry. You know, I think there's some there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's a whole lot there that would make a dramatic difference in what his conclusions are. I think, and again, this is the staff has looked at that memo a couple times now, and the technical committee has looked at it. I will tell you, the technical committee's the primary input we got from the technical committee related to this opportunity for transit to be introduced more strongly in the plan and in the code, that take advantage of that, or take advantage of this process and the TOD process that's coming along, the alternatives analysis, to think a lot about how transit could be leveraged here and utilized to improve the zoning.
That's a concern that I have, though, and I've been listening to everybody, but my concern is that if we develop our plan too much further without the input from NFTA, we could be 3 months, 4 months down the road when they come up with the report, and maybe we're going to have to go back and revisit it again.
Yeah, and that's entirely possible. But we actually have a wonderful opportunity. That TOD study will probably start in the next month or two. I don't know what the schedule will be for that. You know, we're on about an 18-month schedule here, so I think there'll be opportunity for kind of a crosstalk and crosswalk of concepts here as we go forward.
It is a great opportunity, there's no doubt about it. From a committee's perspective, again, then if we don't have any more questions, can we assume that we're pretty well set with this report from Code Studio?
I had tried to put in writing to you in regards to the stakeholder interviews that some folks felt that they weren't had the opportunity to speak during the stakeholders interview, especially with the environment and conservation, and that maybe one person dominated a particular interview.
So let me address that.
So I don't know how you're going to maybe have these people interviewed again.
Okay, perhaps. We probably need to think about that a little bit. The focus of that interview was on sustainable forms of infrastructure. The focus of this study is on commercial centers and more urban places. And it just so happened that one of the people that was at the interview, and I wasn't there, we were not there for those, is working very closely with the village on implementing their sustainable infrastructure program here in the village. A lot of that has manifested itself in Spring Street redevelopment across the street. Rain gardens, storm drainage treatment in an urban area, in and around a commercial center. So, we don't direct the consultant in those interviews. We provide kind of a focus group for folks that relate to that certain topic. I know they were keen on understanding what was going on here at this time related to sustainable forms of infrastructure. We can probably do another interview if we need to discuss some of the issues that folks didn't feel they had the opportunity to address. I guess I'd like to know more specifically what kinds of things they felt they wanted to address the consultant with, so we can kind of form that accordingly.
But for purposes of discussion this evening, that is not entered into the report from Coach Studio.
No, I think we need to understand what a stakeholder interview is intended for. And in large part, that's intended to get the consultant spun up on the local situation. What's going on here, what kinds of issues are there, who are the players, what opportunities might exist here, because they're coming in here from out of town, and they need to have an understanding of what's happening here. That's the real intent of the stakeholder interview. We can talk more about how we afford that opportunity if we do. I would certainly say that if there are other environmental concerns, they can be and will be addressed along the way. There'll certainly be ample opportunity for folks to articulate those kind of concerns. But if we feel strongly that we need to have another opportunity for that, that's possible.
Yes.
I've had a number of conversations with people who were involved with that particular stakeholder interview, and I was really concerned by the fact that they did not get an opportunity to voice their concerns, notwithstanding that they may have concerns that were not related to commercial development. But that being the case, I think we made a commitment to find some way to create an opportunity for them to voice what those concerns are, and we'll actively work to get that done.
I guess that's where I'm going to, for purposes of discussion this evening for our committee, the working committee, okay? The report does not address that, and what I'm more interested in this point is from the committee itself, the report that we got, are we satisfied with it? Do we want to make any deletions, corrections, additions, or are we prepared to let Dan deal with some of the nuances of it that we discussed already with Code Studio?
It's more of a question than a correction or at this point. But on the table, on the slide before, the zoning table, earlier, Dan, you talked about looking at the geographies of the commercial centers and the mixed-use centers will come later. But this table seems to start to put specific geographic areas under assessment, and that far right column is a question if I'm reading it correctly, is this geographic area zoned correctly? It lists the area, and then it lists the current zoning, and then a score has been, a ranking has been given to it. Almost all of them are partially achieves objectives. One achieves and one does not achieve, and it just seems like that's putting the cart before the horse, at least the way you described it earlier, and that I guess I don't know, does this table say that the zoning is correct or incorrect in those areas?
I think the word on the side is appropriate.
Right.
So I think what he's saying is, given this array of places, and these are 17 mixed-use activity centers.
In your hand.
These are the 17 mixed-use activity centers, right? And what he's saying is these are the center types that were ascribed to it, and then this is the zoning that exists today. And I think what he's saying is that in some ways, maybe the zoning code that's articulated here may not be appropriate for that area. So I think the word is appropriate, and I think that what he's trying to do here is build a case for examination of this,
Okay,
right?
so those geographies still will be examined.
Sure. I mean, the intent here is to look at the centers, right? Now, we're gonna, there's been some discussion about this as well. We're gonna look in detail at 2 or 3 of these. We don't have the resources to look at them all. But we certainly hope that the process and the approach that we use here will allow us to do that in other places.
I think the intent also is to make us as a committee think about it, and whether we agree or disagree too, because if we disagree, we need to tell him that so he can look at it again maybe in a little different light. So again, are we okay with it as it stands with, again, some nuance changes that Dan will discuss with them? Everybody's okay? Okay.
I'm not picking up a whole lot of significant...
No, I'm not either. There's some nuances that you want to talk to him about, but there's nothing major at this point.
I mean, we can talk about that, but I think the intent was to try and get this thing out really as quickly as possible. So we can talk about this tomorrow and see if there's anything there that, I would ask the question probably, is there anything here that folks see as just absolutely incorrect, inappropriate?
So we pointed out to you already.
Yeah. That's it. Okay. Okay, so with that, the other component that Lee provided was the public outreach plan. And this slide, the intent or the goal there was to prepare a plan. Back up just a second for me, please. That will guide the participatory activities that we're going to employ in this process. It's intended to give us a good array of approaches and techniques to elicit public input to this process and to create an environment that's participatory. And so what the plan does is articulates different ways that we intend to do that to the extent that resources allow and the situation provides. So let's go to the next one. So this is the array of approaches that are discussed. It's kind of an outline of the different approaches that are discussed in the outreach plan. The first one is the town boards and the committees, and that's the town board and its committees, the various committees, the ACAC, the Traffic Safety Board, those other folks that work with the town board to help manage development and growth in the town. And then there's the 2 project committees, one of which is you. I will tell you that in the past, when we've done these kinds of projects, we've found that some of the strongest valuable input and insights we get is from these committees that are formed to support these processes. And again, you all are here. You're here to provide a perspective from your background and experiences to this process, which you've already started to do tonight, in providing some insights to the work that's been done. In terms of outreach to stakeholders, there's quite a list of approaches that we intend to take there. They include, in this case, there's a list of points along the project where there will be public meetings and other activities like the charrette, or the public workshop that will take place in September. Most of it is task-based. It will articulate our ability to provide notification of meetings to the greatest extent that we can. Mentions the website, something that we're utilizing in this project that is, to my knowledge, certainly hasn't been used by this department, is social media. We're going to try and utilize Facebook and Twitter and some of those other avenues to try and get information out and elicit comments from the folks that are signed along with us. And I think Annette will talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Certainly, there'll be a lot of presentation of the methods and materials from this process. That information will be posted to the web, so it should be fully accessible. One of the comments we got from our technical committee was perhaps the use of text messages or text messaging as a way to elicit input on specific kinds of recommendations that might come out of the study. So we'll talk more about that as that idea develops, but that's something we think we might be able to do in order to again, get some more feedback from the community. That goes along with the project website. Community outreach, that'll probably depend, and local events will probably depend largely on the project schedule. For example, it might be very difficult for us to do a whole lot of outreach at Old Home Days in July because this project will not be significantly far along to provide any significant kind of insights. We might go there and talk about the project or try to elicit some interest in the project, but we might not be there schedule-wise, where we might be in a better position later on. So we're gonna have to make a judgment on those to see when we can take advantage of those opportunities to put the information out. We mentioned the stakeholder interviews, and honestly, in talking to the consultant, that's something we may look at as something that we may try to utilize through the process to some extent. So Rick mentioned we'll try and make that happen. That's his call, not mine. But that's something that almost borders on a focus group. And the ones that we've had so far, the consultants have been very pleased with the insights that they get because it's personal. It gives people an opportunity to react to questions and react to each other. And then the other thing that we find extremely valuable about that is that it essentially creates an interest in the project and it creates a stakeholder, someone who's interested in the project and wants to follow along. And that's certainly something we found from a few of the folks that we talked to so far. The last two are kind of interesting. This project will be very complex in terms of the output. It's going to have a significant effect on our zoning code. And one of the elements in the work program is to provide training for our staff and other local design professionals about the code, about how to use it, about what its intent is. So that's a session or so that will be conducted at the conclusion of the project. And lastly, there's an opportunity here for us to educate the local planning community about how this has worked. This is probably the largest effort locally to implement context-sensitive zoning code on a kind of comprehensive basis in a suburban community in this area. And I think that's one of the reasons why NYSERDA was so interested in participating in this project, because potentially it goes a long way in informing communities as to how this can be done, and it advances other initiatives, more sustainable types of planning initiatives in the region. So one of the last tasks we have here is a kind of a community forum to talk about this thing with local planners to help them maybe introduce these kinds of approaches and processes to their communities if they wish to pursue that. Let's stop there for a minute. Any thoughts on the participation, the outreach plan? Anybody have anything from their read that we should be aware of?
I think it's important that, as a committee, we come to consensus on how fast we deliver this work product. You know, if we can agree that, you know, within a week's time, after you've consulted with Code Studio, we can get this posted to the website, or if you think that's too short of a time. But I think as we walk away here tonight, I think it's important to, you know, the more and the faster we get it out there, the more input we can have from other stakeholders besides us.
Okay.
In regards to the outreach, I know there's a couple of gentlemen here tonight representing homeowners associations. What about the other homeowners associations in the town that could be notified?
Okay.
UB certainly has a vested interest in the success of the town of Amherst, and to that degree, I was wondering if you've reached out to Bob Shibley and the Regional Institute to try to marshal some of their resources in helping with certain aspects of this project.
Yep. So, I mentioned a moment ago that the idea of a tech survey has come up along the way, and that's a direct result of the participation of Bart Roberts from UBRI on the technical committee, and Kelly Dixon from GBNRTC on the technical committee. One Region Forward, which just concluded about 6-7 months or so ago, was a large, probably one of the largest regional planning initiative I've certainly seen in my career here in Western New York. And it just so happened that they won a national award for their public participation program. And so we're fortunate to have them working with us on the technical side. And you know, they've already brought some significant insights to that, to this process that'll be integrated into this. In fact, we're gonna be talking to them a little bit more this week or next week on that.
Anybody else? As far as the posting to the website, we've had quite a bit of conversation about that, Dan and I and Gary, and we know that it's important to get it on as quickly as possible. Absolutely.
I'll talk about that in a minute. I might have a suggestion. I don't, you know, maybe we can talk. Maybe we have a suggestion as to how we can do that in a timely fashion. And we'll put a caveat on it in terms of the date, so we can push that out as quickly as we can. Because I think what we'd like to do is get public input to those products as quickly as we can. And in some ways, although this doesn't dictate what we do or how quickly we do it, we do have an obligation to NYSERDA to provide products along the way according to a schedule, which has some flexibility, but it all kind of needs to move forward at a good pace. So
Yeah, I think we're all sensitive to the fact that the quicker we get it out to the public too, the more we get the comments back to us as quickly as possible, so that we can turn them over to Code Studio, so by the next meeting, we can have answers to the questions that were asked.
Right. So, if there's no other questions on that, I'm going to ask Annette to talk just a little bit about what she's finding thus far in her monitoring of the website and some of the social media.
We've just, real briefly, created a platform for people to interact. We've got a Facebook, we've got Twitter, and to date, there's not been a lot of interaction because there's not been a lot of work product. Right now, we've got a little over 100 people signed up, and most of those are my friends. So, what I would ask you to do as our most prominent stakeholders in this room is get all of your friends to sign up, because as the old shampoo commercial goes, you tell a friend, and they'll tell a friend, and they'll tell a friend, and pretty soon it multiplies. That's how it works. And I'm in the business of creating stakeholders. That's what we want to do. And once we have that platform of friends, we can get more messages out, we get more interaction, and that's why we did this. So like I said, I don't have a whole lot to report as far as who's saying things, because there's not a lot to interact with. But when we get into this, I will have what they said, when they said it, when the hot topics were mentioned, what blew up, what was ignored, you know, what they responded to, and I can come back every month with those numbers, and you can see, you know, on a minute-to-minute basis who's reacting. I will tell you that right now, women 45 to 54 are your biggest fans. That might be because that's my age group.
saying to sign up on the Facebook?
Yes, there's a
Website?
Facebook page, there, you can become a fan, Imagine Amherst, just click the page, just like it. Just like it. All right? Or if you're at Twitter, our handle is Imagine Amherst. Hashtag Imagine Amherst. Any other questions?
Is anybody done that?
No, I can tell you no.
Not even you?
You know, in defense of the committee at this point, I think we're waiting for some material to be on there before we really got really active, because we've seen the print material in front of us, but now that there's going to be an opportunity for people to start looking at this via the website and so forth, and as they commented, I think all of us will be interested in looking at it.
Yeah, again, in one of the stakeholder interviews with the younger folks, I mean, they clearly, in fact, one young lady just told the consultant, I'm your girl, so let me know what you need me to do. I'll push this on Facebook. I'll push it on Twitter. Well, we got our own gal to do that, but there's a lot of enthusiasm about it at that age level, and you know, those are folks that we traditionally have challenges in getting involved in these kinds of things. So that's a way to do it. If the text survey is a way to do it, then that's what we need to do. So we will do that, Frank.
Is there a way that you get the Amherst be involved? Because a lot of people read that, and that would be a good source.
In terms of
The website, what information might be available on the website so they could look at it, and it would generate some interest.
sure, I don't know if you want to address that.
Well, each time the press releases have gone out, there have been 2 articles done in the Bee, the website has been mentioned,
Okay.
both times.
I just haven't seen it. I read it, but I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on the public outreach plan? I'm not hearing, I heard a couple suggestions, certainly other things we can incorporate, but that might have something that maybe we can turn around real quick here and get out there so folks understand how we intend to communicate with them and what avenues they have to communicate with us. There is an email capability on the website. We trying to work with our IT guys to get those to funnel directly to Town Hall instead of going to a net. We haven't cracked that code just yet, but we have the emails that we've received. I think we had about 10, 9 or 10. Okay, so we have those, and you know, we'll just kind of progress forward and try to do as much as we can with this, with the technology that's out there. So.
Well, the other thing too, again, we've been talking about this between Dan and Gary and I, and we realize the importance of this, and we're looking at ways to continue to make sure that we get out to the public. We had a meeting tonight with Ramona where we discussed options too, so we're certainly very sensitive to the fact that we need to have this information out, and we need to do it in many different forms, and we want to make sure we can get as much input as we can. So we're continuing to work on that, and as we get answers, we'll get the committee better informed as to what we're doing. This is a pretty extensive plan as it exists today. Again, I think the committee really looked at this as being an add-on report. I know I did, and more just for informational purposes, more than for us to comment on. So, but if anybody has any comments or any suggestions, certainly, if you don't have them tonight, but you have them going forward, Dan?
Dan, I'm just wondering, further along the line, as we get into visioning of these activity centers, mixed-use activity centers, will there be a visual preference survey where, you know, as a planning board member, it's nice to know what your community values in the form of design, and if we have the community backing this up on, you know, what they like as a design option, I think that's helpful. I'm just wondering if you're going to have a visual preference survey as part of your outreach.
Again, this project is going to end up being very specific at some point about certain places, and for those places that we choose to drill down into great detail, The scope of work affords the opportunity for a nationally known urban design firm to be here to actually draw and conceptualize that vision for those places. That's part of that charrette activity that's going on in September. Hopefully it'll be well attended, and because it's a linchpin to this project in those places. So I can't really understate that. People or overstate it. We need to start thinking about that now, and we are, and we will talk more about that as the summer goes along. But yeah, I mean there's the ability there to take people's vision and comments and transform it into graphical images that would begin to address some of the shortcomings that Lee talked about for those centers.
Is there the ability on the website, if someone's traveling in another city and sees a great picture of a mixed-use project, they take it, is there an opportunity to upload that to the website, so it's, send us your best images of mixed-use areas that, you'd love to see in the town of Amherst, something like that.
Right. We did that in the comprehensive plan process several years ago. We basically had the good, the bad, and the not so good, because we didn't want to say anything was ugly. We can do that. In fact, I got an email today from somebody who was in Oxford, Ohio, over the weekend, and saw a university-related center there that they thought was really, really cool. And they said, "This is perfect. I thought this was great. My family enjoyed their time here." So yeah, absolutely. We just got to figure out. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We'll open that opportunity up.
There's a form fill on every page of the website, so you can just put your email, and you can put a text message or a picture or whatever you want on every page. So
Is there the ability to attach it at the bottom?
you could attach anything. Yeah, absolutely. So
Carl's got to do it while we're talking.
yeah. So the answer to your question is yes.
I think Carl's point is probably more to let's push it out there and help encourage people to do it. Passionately say.
Yeah, I mean,
So we'll
right
do
now,
that.
it seems like the website is something that you go up and download a report that it's going to take 20 minutes or more to read. If you make it more fun, and so that people can just be a little more, when they get the inspiration, send something like a picture or write a quick comment,
Yep.
you might get more engagement.
Yep. The web affords a lot of opportunities, and our intent, and having Annette on board, is to take advantage of the technology and those opportunities.
In the meantime, if you have something that you can't post for some reason, send it to Dan. He'll make sure it gets posted. Right, Dan? You don't mind getting a lot of stuff, right?
Nope. As long as Dave Willer doesn't come down and tell me I've exceeded some kind of capacity, I'll take it.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, some of us are just figuring this stuff out. If you can't tell already, which is
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
In the meantime,
And I would say that generally for the town. I said this at the beginning, and I'll reiterate that. This is new for the town. So we're going to try and take advantage of it, and try to work that a little bit. One of the things we found early on in some discussions is we don't have a good policy on social media in general, and so that's something the town needs to think about a little bit as we go into this a little further. So, and they're aware. The IT guys are aware of it. It's just something we got to work on. So. Yeah, true enough. True enough. It's another benefit of having the GBNRTC on our technical committee. They've gone through this. They've got a policy. They've got experience with it, and they're more than willing to help us with this. They've been very, very helpful. So great cooperation with them.
Do you need any more input from the committee as far as this portion of the report is concerned?
Last slide. And this is something I guess we're going to have to negotiate a little bit. So, again, we're going to, in a moment, we'll have a time for the folks that are here from the community to talk about what they heard and what they think on those two pieces. Again, here's the website for the town. There's a logo on the town website that connects you right to the Imagine Amherst site. The address is there. We can talk about this. My goal would be to try and get this stuff out onto the website as quickly as possible, with the idea of trying to get public comment back by early May sometime. So if there's got to be consideration of public comment to this as we finalize it, and we'd like to be able to bring it back, these two memos, bring it back to this committee maybe in May and say, here's some public reflections on this, here's your reflections on it, and we can go ahead and progress a little further to finalizing those documents. They're not going to be final until we say they're final. At some point, I'm going to have to provide something to New York State, whether that's the final version or not, whatever. This is our project, so we'll do what we have to do. We can satisfy them, and we can take care of ourselves. And they're very cooperative thus far, so there's no issue there. And then the last thing, I guess, is that the next meeting of the committee will be May 25th, Wednesday, May 25th, 7 p.m. Right now, it's currently scheduled to be here. So I guess number 4 is the one that, I guess I would start by saying we'll try and wicker in what we heard tonight, see if there's any adjustments that need to be made, and then if it's this committee's desire to allow us to put that up on the website for public consideration at the earliest opportunity, we can do that, and we'll move forward.
It is our desire.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Looking at the time, since I know everybody's attention span is limited, when we have evenings where we have really a lot of substance to discuss, if it lasts for a couple of hours, it's understandable, but tonight we don't really have a lot, but it's getting close to time. Any public comment? Please.
Basically, what I'm hearing is that we're moving away from regional commercial centers and trying to incorporate that more into mixed-use centers in neighborhoods with context-sensitive scaling, etc. My question is, should we define the public space first in terms of sidewalks, open space, etc., and make that the framework for, according to scale, and then add in, what forms can translate into different uses that would make sense within the neighborhoods? And, environmental concerns included in that. And then the other thing was, the biggest thing I've heard about the website is that people will make a comment and it disappears. They never get a response. They don't know where it's going, who's seeing it, what it's going to be used for. So if for a communication section on the website, maybe you could put all the different ways that you can communicate, including maybe a contact at the planning department to send comments to if they don't want to put stuff on Facebook or Twitter or other things. They can send an email.
So like thank you, your response was received.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and they'll all be compiled, and at some point, everyone will be able to see what the comments were, kind of like the comprehensive plan. But then you could say you can communicate via Twitter, Facebook, on the website, or send an email to such and such.
First thing I'd like to mention, I think it's a big mistake to hold all your meetings in this room. I think a better place would be over at the town hall, where more people could go to the meetings. I think here, with essentially 13 seats available to the public, limits your availability to talk to the public. If that's what you want, you're getting it. Secondarily, I find that, for instance, an example, the announcement for this meeting on the town website was on April 15th, and in a list that pushed down. The announcement on the Imagine Amherst website, I think, was the day before this meeting, which was yesterday. Maybe it was on Sunday. I don't really know. When you're announcing a meeting 1 or 2 days before, it makes no sense. Just so you know, I watch this website practically every day. Number 2, this announcement was put on the contacts page where nobody would have an interest in looking at. I am not a big fan of the design of this particular website. I think it's extremely weak. I think the page, the little squirrely thing between page could be removed with no loss of anything. It's very slow. It doesn't have very much content. Any website that doesn't have content that changes reasonably often is going to get nobody's attention. It's when you have information for people on an ongoing basis, you get any traffic. It ain't going to happen. I'm not a big fan of your Facebook page or your Twitter account. I think they're extremely weak. You have posts on there between 3 weeks between posts. Nobody's going to come back to that. For instance, one of the things you should do on your web page is have something called new stuff or new information, someplace where they can go to say, aha, all I want is what's new. You don't have that. You've got to have people searching around all over the place. After a while, they're going to give up and leave. As far as people being coming in, your public outreach plan, my personal feelings is you'll never get past 1% of the population. So if you want to get more than that, I think you need a better plan, because I don't think the plan you have now is worth anything for that. 1% is 1,220 people. All right? That's 1% of the entire population of the town of Amherst. I consider myself a stakeholder here as a resident of 122,000 people. I think the people you're missing are the 122,000 people. The 14 people here I don't think are sufficient for acting as a portal to those people. I think you've missed that. I think the public outreach plan is woefully inadequate. I haven't even got time to get around to all the substantive issues I found with the other parts of this plan, and I will. But right now, I think you're fooling yourself if you think you're doing anything at all effectively with the people. Thank you very much.
My name is Jim Tricoli. I write the Amherst Times for the last 17 years. It's on the website. A couple of things. It's hard to say this, but one of the largest reasons people do not write things to your committee because they feel it was unfairly chosen. That's the biggest reason. I'm involved with nearly the entire town of Amherst. That's why I get information. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you, that the village of Williamsville was complimented in this report. If I wanted to buy a white shirt in our town, I live in the village, where would I go? In the village. If I wanted to buy a suit like some of these gentlemen have, where do I go? In the village. I can get tattooed now in the village. And when I talked to the owner, he said the reason we came here, because there's a lot of 45 to 50-year-old women who like to have tattoos on their bellies. So he plans to make a big business. That tattoo shop is in the Ed Young's Plaza. Well, you know, hey, if they want to come, it's money for the town. But I don't think the village is doing things to make it like someplace like Niagara on the Lake. Or there's some places in Florida I found to be great little places to live. But we don't have a walkable village. Where are you going to walk to? To get food? We got great food. A 5 and 10 cent store, forget it. We don't have one. To a theater, like a community theater. Forget that too. Lancaster does well. You really look at the village. There's so many things that can be done. So Brian Cope over here, who's not here, is the mayor, and Brian and I are very opposed. He's on one side and I'm on the other. We get together very often, and Brian has particular plans. He wants to make it a concrete New York City, the village. I don't want that. I want the village to be, yes, sir. That's what it was about, development. And we're talking, okay, I'll take number one. Okay, the code revision. If the public was given those forms, papers that the committee got, that would help them a little understand what you're doing. One. Next month?
No, before that.
You think so?
It'll be next month. It'll be early next month.
And okay, fine. And the few people, and the few people that read it will understand it, correct? I didn't understand most of it. Mixed use, I think Mr. Montandi asked about what mixed use was, and he said, could a hotel be next to a building for business? And you said, yes. That isn't mixed use. What is that? That's having a hotel next to a building. Come on, be serious. Okay? And some of you people didn't talk at all. You didn't talk. You didn't. Why? Are they? Here, gotcha. Okay, before you lose everything.
Okay.
And you will.
We're not talking environmental issues.
No, we're talking about the transit-oriented mixed-use development for commercial center connections.
Really, thank you for this opportunity for public input. Right, 3 minutes. The One Region Forward met about 2 weeks ago to discuss this process. As far as the, just so you know, on Thursday at 5:30, the United States Department of Transportation and the Hale Morris, those people from the GBNRTC, are going to be at the library to discuss the Metropolitan Planning Organization as far as this project, that we should be looking at what was planned, okay, in the village and the town in 1969 to relocate the thruway toll barrier, okay, out to Clarence, okay, to also have the, I put this on at the town board meeting as far as the Youngs Road extension, to have access and egress to the thruway, as well as the adaptive reuse for the Amherst garbage dump on Worley Drive, where the supervisor took $4 million and threw it down the toilet because of the zoning. Now, really, that's what we're here for. I mean, come on. There's an opportunity. What I'm proposing, what I've been working on for some 12 years. My father used to be the mayor here in the village when the town used to be in meet in the village room. They'd never meet at the same time. But what I'm proposing is an adaptive joint agreement that will include Amherst, Cheektowaga, Lancaster, and Clarence, as far as the commercial strip that's going to, as far as mixed use, okay? And at the CAC, the Town of Amherst Conservation Advisory Committee meeting that Eric was at, there was a developer giving a presentation for a subdivision on Sheridan Drive where the property goes into Ellicott Creek. Okay, now, as far as what some pragmatic, as far as some implementation of some recommendations, some proposals, okay, would be for the eminent domain, for the Ellicott Creek Greenway Parks and, Ellicott Creek, the Greenway Heritage Parks and Trails. We've got National Historic Landmarks that are connected to Ellicott Creek that go back prior to, 3 minutes. Oh, excuse me.
Thank you.
That was fun. I'll see you next time.
Okay. One last bit of business before we adjourn. Meeting notes were provided to the committee. Any comments or any corrections, deletions, additions to those notes? Okay, seeing none, they'll be filed appropriately. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the public for your input. We will see you Wednesday, May 25th, and unless you hear otherwise, we'll be in this room at 7 o'clock once again. Thanks for attending.